So I've talked about the movement to force a vote on Medicare for all or single payer in the middle of a pandemic endlessly on this show. And it's because I really view that as one of the most consequential, crucial, and defining moments for this working class movement, populist movement, whatever you want to call it, um, in recent history. Because, like I said, we were in a pandemic, worst emergency in U.S. history, hundreds of thousands of people dead, virus raging out of control, millions of people losing their insurance, tens of millions of people before they were uninsured or underinsured. So we were already in a public health emergency because of the lack of healthcare in this country. And we talk about the numbers before: 68,000 people dying every year because they can't afford basic healthcare, 500,000 people going bankrupt. And the number one cause of bankruptcy for them is because they couldn't pay back their medical bills. So the urgency behind the need for single payer in this country, it's impossible for me to put into words. So when we have a moment where the politicians who made this their key policy issue that they all ran on, that they all got elected on, and they, like I said, pretend that's their number one issue. Well, there weren't any more excuses. They had the numbers, they had the leverage, they had the power to force a vote on that issue at a time when we needed it the most. And what ended up happening, what ended up unfolding in those 3-4 weeks, really exposed a lot of people. It exposed those charlatan politicians, but it also exposed a lot of people in the media who have built these brands and these careers, these prominent left journalists or commentators and or hosts, and they built these brands on claiming to be part of the fight in trying to advance these policies like single payer, a living wage, ending the wars, and radical climate action and things like that. They built this brand on advocating for those issues, and specifically in the field of journalism. So like I said, the moment came to force a vote on the number one issue of the movement, providing healthcare to everybody in this country free at the point of service in the middle of a pandemic. When that time came and they had the numbers, we had the numbers in Congress to make it happen, a lot of people in media, instead of using their influence to make sure that vote happened, to put pressure on those politicians like AOC and Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib and Pramila Jayapal, instead of using their influence in their audience to put pressure on those politicians to force that vote on Medicare for all, many of them chose to obfuscate, and they were an obstacle to us getting a floor vote. So like I said, it was a defining moment, and you guys already know this. I've talked about it a bunch on the show. So a lot of people who came out on the wrong side of that, they are still feeling the heat from it. And honestly, there's been more blowback from the way that the politicians and media figures handled the force to vote moment. There's been more blowback from that than even the CARES Act, which was a complete betrayal of the movement, a giant corporate heist in the middle of an emergency, and they used the cover of the pandemic to let the rich run out the back door with all the money. And all the so-called leftists and progressives of Congress, they helped them do that. They facilitated that. They weren't in opposition. They weren't fighting for policies to bail out the regular people, the working class people. They went along with the corporate heist with little to no resistance. So they've gotten more shit over forced to vote than they have over the CARES Act. And some people are really starting to panic. You see with the death spiral of the Young Turks and Cenk Uygur and Anna Kasparian, and also it's a lot of people at the Intercept are trying to reclaim their credibility on the left after the way that they handled that, which was horrible. Instead of pressuring politicians to do what they ran on, you have people like Ryan Grimm running cover for those politicians and smearing the people who were trying to pressure them to do what they ran on. And so that brings me to the topic of this video. Briahna Joy Gray, from host of the Bad Faith podcast, she sat down and did an interview with Ryan Grimm, mostly about the force to vote moment and the fallout after it. And she uploaded 2 big clips from the interview on YouTube. And one of them was specifically about the issue of their credibility and among the people on the left now. And to her credit, Briahna Joy Gray, there are very few people who are willing to make their friends and their colleagues uncomfortable by asking them tough questions. But credit to Briahna Joy Gray, she did a great job of pressing Ryan Grimm here. Now, let me be clear, going into this, I had little to no respect for Ryan Grimm at this point. I've seen what he's been doing over the last few months. I've really been skeptical of him for a while now. He's like some very bland, vanilla, calls himself progressive, but very, very status quo-y. So I was always skeptical of Ryan Grimm, but over the last few months, it kind of killed it for me because, like I said, wrong side of force to vote, defending politicians while they left us for dead in the middle of an emergency. I mean, that's shitty journalism, and just always defending the duopoly, the Democratic Party, at this late date. So, I mean, he's really offering up nothing that I want, any media that I want to consume. But that's neither here nor there. He answered the questions. His answers were really fucking bad. At one point, I was even as bad as an opinion I have of Ryan Grimm going into this. I kind of felt bad for him at one point in the interview. He was trying to explain his shitty interview with Pramila Jayapal. But I'm glad I continued to listen to it. I watched the whole thing because he really talked himself out of any sympathy points he was getting from me. And then also, Briahna Joy Gray, she had a follow-up for him that really, his answer made me think he was just lying this whole time. So, she asked him about that shitty interview with Pramila Jayapal. She asked him about the Intercept in general, doing softball interviews. And at one point, he even tries to pretend like access journalism isn't even a thing. He literally tried to pretend like reporters and journalists don't bias their content, whatever they're creating, they don't bias it and in a way that's favorable towards whatever politician that they're trying to interview. He literally tried to pretend like access journalism isn't a real thing. So there was so much to break down, and so I'm gonna get to that. But first, you already know that daily if you're able to contribute to the show, I have the links in the description box of this video. They're also on the about page of the YouTube channel. Links for the merchandise. We just got put new t-shirts and mugs, so you guys can go check that out. I also have links to Patreon If you want to help support the show monthly, sign up and we have different levels: $2 a month, $5 a month, $10 a month. And I'm starting next week. I will be doing a Patreon video every week. It's not going to be like some huge exclusive. It's just really going to be like a preview of some of the stories that I want to talk about for the rest of the week, and I'll reply to some of the comments and stuff like that from the patrons. But it's not something you guys will all get. Whatever I say in that video, you will all see later on in the week. So it's nothing that you're not missing out on anything. It's just a little something for the people who want to help support the show. Also, I have links to PayPal if you want to help contribute. If you feel more comfortable doing a one-time contribution. And I'm just incredibly grateful for all the people who keep showing up, the people who keep watching the videos, people who keep sharing and commenting. And yes, I read all the comments, and I will be replying to more comments. You guys helped me do this show. You guys have helped me come this far with the show, and I'm just incredibly grateful. And I know I took some time off, some personal things going on, which I'll talk to you about in a later date. But yeah, so I have the clip, and before I play I have two clips to show you. So I was trying to figure out how to play this in a way, because Ryan Grimm, he's boring as all shit, and when he is asked about something and he wants to dodge the question, he goes off on some irrelevant ass tangent about something that nobody wants to hear about. And he talks for like a minute, he like filibusters, and he hopes that everybody forgot what the conversation is about. And you kind of lose your train of thought. So it's really distracting. It's boring as shit. I didn't want to sit through it. So I know so many people in my audience don't want to sit through it. So I cut the way I cut the clips, it's not like deceptively edited. The first clip, I just cut out like maybe a minute and a half of him talking about something completely irrelevant to the first question, which was really a good question. And I want to have the answer in a coherent, connected way. And so I just cut out when he was talking about a bunch of other bullshit that was completely irrelevant. But I promise you, everything that was relevant to the answer is in there. You guys can make your mind up. I'll play the clip and then we'll come back and break it down. So this first question was, Briahna Joy Gray asked Ryan Grimm about the interview he had with Pramila Jayapal in January after the vote for the Speaker of the House had already happened, and they already folded, and they didn't make any policy demands. So he had an interview with Pramila Jayapal where he asked her about why she didn't force a vote on Medicare for All, and her answer was bullshit. She came with Kevin McCarthy would have been Speaker of the House, which is completely not factual. It's a lie. It's false. It's been disproven many times over. If the Justice Democrats, the 6 of them, 7 of them, didn't vote for Nancy Pelosi and voted for somebody else, it could have been literally anybody else on the planet, voted for them to be Speaker of the House, nobody would have had a majority needed to become the Speaker of the House. The Republicans nominee, Kevin McCarthy, wouldn't have, and the Democrats nominee, Nancy Pelosi, wouldn't have had the majority needed to become Speaker of the House. So what would have happened is there would have been multiple rounds. There would have been wheeling and dealing. There would have been cajoling, and somebody would have had to cave in order to get the necessary votes to become Speaker of the House. And for that to even happen with Kevin McCarthy, that would require 7 Democrats to go and vote for the Republican, Kevin McCarthy, to be Speaker of the House. So if that were to even happen, you can't put the blame on just Democrats because they're demanding a vote on Medicare for All. You could put the blame squarely on the 7 Democrats who voted for a Republican to be Speaker of the House. So that was a completely nonsensical scenario that wasn't going to happen, but it was the straw man that people were using in order to deflect, because they didn't want to actually challenge Democratic leadership. and force their hand on this issue. So they were just reaching for straws. And that was a bullshit excuse. And that's what Pramila Jayapal told Ryan Grimm in that interview. And he provided no pushback, and there was not a follow-up question. So Briahna Joy Gray asked him about that, because that really turned a lot of people off on Ryan Grimm. Because, I mean, but anyway. So I have the clip. I'll play the clip, and then we'll come back and break it down.
So, yes, like, I'll like cry uncle on that one, like, for sure. Like, if I had that interview to do over again, and she's like, but it's a difference between McCarthy and Pelosi, I'd be like, well, not on that day. Like, that's not right. Like, basically, you'll go back to caucus, you'll fight it out, and either another speaker candidate emerges, or you get your concessions, and then everybody agrees and goes back to the floor. And everybody has to agree, because if the Blue Dogs are like, no, I'm not doing so-and-so, or, I'm not doing Katie Porter as speaker, then she don't, so, but eventually they find, and, it has taken days in the past, to find a speaker. So yeah, fair enough. Like, yeah. I guess I like here, and the irony is, like, I felt like I was like doing a solid to the force the vote people by asking at all about it. Because in like my preference at that point was to move on. Mm-hmm. It had gotten so toxic.
It's lots of people's preference, but I won't let it happen.
And so then later I'm like, shit, I should have done that, and I'm getting dunked on here. And yeah, I just didn't think of it in the moment as like the follow up, because a lot of like my interviewing style, I'm not Mehdi Hasan, who's like listening for every word that's slightly off from his interlocutor, and then just like grabbing onto it and breaking their leg with it. In my mind, I'm like, which moves a lot more slowly than most people's, and definitely Mehdi's, and definitely yours. I'm thinking of my next question, and so I need to do a better job of like absorbing the question and like responding to it. Anyway, so yeah.
I understand that people have different interview styles, and it can be easy to miss a follow-up. People complain to us at Bad Faith all the time about having missed something in an interview, and people will probably complain about this as well. But if my feeling at the time was, if you are really following and invested and have like respect for the case that the force the vote side is making, then you would know that Kevin McCarthy argument was one of the most specious and prevalent arguments being used against us. And the second the word McCarthy was out of her mouth, it should have been like, red flags, this is where we nail her. Like, right. This is where it's going down. I would have been waiting with bated breath for her to try to use that excuse with me.
Please
try to McCarthy me.
Right. And that there's an asymmetry. Like, I never actually even wrote an article about this.
Yeah, I think I was the only one in America who did.
and Sirota.
And Sirota, for sure.
And so I wasn't as attuned to the buzzwords as I should have.
But this is the thing, Ryan.
Even though it's like defining like on my presence at the time.
To get involved.
Yeah, I
without knowing what you're that is in and of itself the sin.
It's like leave the party. Like you're late for the party. You don't know what's going on. Just go.
It's like it's like Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer slapping on a kente cloth mask and kneeling down and having lots of thoughts and feelings like they're going to come to the cookout and explain to me how to make potato salad. Just stay out of it if you don't know.
So like I said, I edited the video for the purposes of production for the audience, but I didn't take anything out of context. If you want, I encourage everybody to go watch the full video, specifically about the Access Journalism, the clip that's on Bad Faith Podcast YouTube channel. You could just watch the whole interview if you sign up for the Patreon. But anyway, so let me get to the first point he makes. For whatever it's worth, he says, oh, if I had to do the interview over again, I would have asked a follow-up question, or I would have challenged her on that. You make with that what you will. Like I said, for whatever it's worth. Me personally, I don't even know if he's telling the truth about that, because what has Ryan Grimm done since then that is like a complete change in the way that he interacts with these elected progressives. He's still the same bootlicking Ryan Grimm who's gonna come out and do apologetics for them every time they shit the bed and they sell us out. So I mean, yes, I know, people would say, oh, take yes for an answer. At least he admits he was wrong. Okay, he's doing that because, like I said, he's trying to save his ass because all of them know, everybody who's on the wrong side of this knows that their credibility has been irreparably damaged. And so they're trying to do as best damage control as they can. So yeah, he said he was wrong. He would do it over again, whatever, like I said, for whatever it's worth. But now I want to talk about something that he says next, which is that he thought he was doing the force to vote movement a solid by even asking the question. Some people may say yes. I would say you claim to be a progressive reporter, and that was the biggest point of contention that we've had in a very long time. So if you're going to sit down with the chair of the Progressive Caucus and you weren't going to bring that up, again, people would be questioning your credibility and your integrity. So you weren't doing anybody any favors by asking that question. And the whole framing it that way, it gets to something that a point that I've been making and many other people have been making since this whole force to vote movement. And honestly, I've been making this point even before then, which is that a lot of these professional leftists, these very prominent and well-paid journalists like Ryan Grimm and these prominent left hosts and commentators and whatever else, left figures, at a certain point, they become disconnected from the urgency that is behind these policies. So what I mean by that is, for Ryan Grimm, whether they force that vote on Medicare for All, whether Medicare for All single payer advanced, it doesn't make a difference in his life. He has the best possible healthcare with a multiple six-figure salary job as DC bureau chief at the Intercept. I think it's Glenn Greenwald, who was the co-founder of the Intercept. I think he might have said Ryan Grimm gets paid like $300,000 or like $500,000, some shit like that every year to do his shitty reporting. So he's very well off. So whatever happened with Force to Vote, whichever way the shit shaked out, he would be fine anyway. His kids wouldn't be worrying about, he wouldn't have to worry about getting healthcare for his kids if they got sick or anything. So for him, the Force to Vote, that moment, it didn't hit the same as it did for a lot of the activists and the people on the streets and the people who were fighting tooth and nail to pressure these elected progressives to do what they ran on and force to vote on single payer, because it's life or death for us. And he doesn't have that urgency. So, and you can tell by that framing, at that point, I just wanted to be done with it. I just wanted it to be over. It was over. Again, this is like, so he had the interview with Pramila Jayapal in January, so it was just a couple of weeks after the vote. And like I said, this was such an important and crucial moment, and they inexplicably flip on their key issue, and there's no reckoning for that. They still haven't had the answer to the left for that. So if you really care about these issues like you pretend to, there's no way that you get to sit down with the chair of the Progressive Caucus and ask her anything in the world and you aren't desperate to get answers for, one, not only why they folded and got nothing for the speaker's vote, but when will they actually ever fight and challenge Democratic leadership? If you actually cared about the results and implementing these policies and advancing these policies, you would be desperate to get answers from them. But since, like I said, Ryan Grimm, he doesn't have the urgency. So he was just over it. It was a lot of arguing. and people were being mean to him. So he just wanted us to move over. He just wanted everybody to forget about it, act like it didn't happen, act like the Justice Democrats didn't have the ability to force a vote on a single payer, and everybody just go about with your lives. The next point, this is where, like I said earlier, I almost sympathized with him for a little bit, even though I know he's a liar, even though I feel like in my bones he's a bad faith actor. I've seen the shit that he's been doing on Twitter. I've seen the journalism he's been doing and sheepdogging people into the Democratic Party and smearing anybody to the left of him. And of course the whole force of the whole thing. But still, when he said that, like, oh, sometimes I process things slower, I kind of sympathize with that because I deal with that too sometimes. So if that was what it is, and maybe, he just couldn't process it in time, I was like, okay, I don't know what it is that came over me. It was like the few seconds when I was watching that part of the interview, something made me want to give him the benefit of the doubt. But going on a little bit further, that shit smacked of bullshit to me. And so you mean to tell me that you're the DC bureau chief for the Intercept, their top political reporter, and you don't know, you're incapable of asking a follow-up question? That's literally what he was trying to say. He was trying to say it was outside of my capabilities to ask Pramila Jayapal a follow-up question. It was outside of my capabilities, my abilities to press her on that obviously bullshit lie that was debunked the very first time it was brought up around forced vote, the whole Kevin McCarthy being Speaker of the House. It's been debunked for weeks at that point, and she's still pushing it. And you, like I said, DC Bureau Chief of the Intercept, getting paid like $300,000 a year to do this job and pressure and to ask tough questions to politicians, you were incapable of forming a follow-up. I don't believe that. That strains credulity. What did it for me and made me see that he was full of shit was the follow-up that Brie asked. And she asked him, if you were following this and you were all in the discussions on Twitter, all in the back and forth, all in the videos and watching the videos, reading the articles that were written, and you should have been very well aware about this Kevin McCarthy bullshit excuse. And when she brought it up, you should have been ready to push her on that or slap that shit down. And his answer to that was stupid and ridiculous. He tries to say, I didn't call bullshit on that because I didn't write an article on force of vote. So that is so disingenuous. Like I said, I was on the threads with Ryan Grimm. I'm seeing him reply to people, Jimmy Dore and Kyle Koleski and Justin Jackson and Briahna Joy Gray and all of the back and forth, Ryan Knife. He knows the Kevin McCarthy bullshit. He debunked it himself when he was on Jimmy Dore's show. So this idea that, he just didn't know enough about it, therefore he let her run roughshod with that bullshit excuse and that bullshit answer, again, strains credulity. And then she nails his ass on that too. Because she's like, okay, so why were you even in the mix? The whole entire time, Ryan Grimm was in the mix defending the Justice Democrats. If you don't know the most basic, crucial argument or excuse being given here, why are you even in it at all? And he had no answer for that. Like I said, it was incredibly disingenuous because and even in this interview that he had with Briahna Gray earlier, he mentions that he brought it up on Jimmy Dore's show about the Kevin McCarthy thing. So now he's trying to pretend like, I didn't push back because I just didn't know better. Oops. How this gets into the whole thing about the access journalism. And she asked him about, she touched on the interview that Jeremy Scahill did with AOC, where he also asked her about, no follow-up questions, also asked her about force of vote, gave a bullshit answer. He asked her about Julian Assange, and she gave that bullshit, wishy-washy answer, oh, we have to see and all that shit, as if he's not being persecuted and prosecuted for exposing war crimes. And that's clear as day that anybody who's paid even 5% attention to this issue over the last 5 years, 7 years, 10 years. So she asked about this because it's clearly become a pattern, and many people in her audience, people in my audience, myself included, have grown to, we've lost trust in the Intercept. We no longer trust the outlet. And it seems like they're doing access journalism, and they've picked a side that they're on team elected progressives, and sometimes maybe they'll ask them a question about like an issue that they might not want to talk about, like force of vote or whatever. But generally, they all know what they're getting. It's going to be a softball interview. There will be no real hard-hitting questions. There will be no pushback. There will be no grilling and follow-up questions and follow-up to the follow-up. They've decided that they just won't do that. And it's become obvious, and it's turning a lot of people off. So she asked him about that, and his answer was, again, shit. He literally tried to, instead of just trying to say, oh, no, that isn't even true, he goes and basically tries to make the argument that access journalism isn't even really a thing. So here's the clip, and I'll come back and break it down.
The ability to interview them. Mm-hmm. What I will say is that people misunderstand access, that you can be extremely critical of people and still have access.
Can you?
Yes.
Because that's not how I feel. And I understand that I'm not an institution. I'm a podcast. But I think that works if they have nowhere else to go. It's like a collective action problem. If every journalist in America were asking the hard questions, they'd have to answer the hard questions. If you can pick and choose between
the way that I have come to understand it over the years, and being like so critical of Democrats throughout the Obama era, and still getting constant interviews with all of the Democrats that we were critical of, up to and including Pelosi, Reid, Schumer, like people who were absolutely lambasting, like consistently, to the point where like Obama's like complaining publicly about us like multiple times throughout his administration, and still having absolutely no problem, because Huffington Post had this gigantic audience of liberals. And so if you are their access to a big audience, then you're going to have access to power to ask them questions. And
right.
So once they understand the size of your audience and how influential you are with that audience, I think that you're going to find that they're not going to care what you said about
Ryan Grimm said, please subscribe to Bad Faith on patreon.com/badfaith.
In fact, the more of you who subscribe, then the more likely then politicians have no choice at that point but to then come on if they want access to this influential and sizable audience.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. But I think it's also true that they can forum shop, especially with these less influential. So if you're AOC and you can go anywhere you want, even the mainstream news wants you, especially given ratings nosedive they're all experiencing right now, then the benefit of coming to some place like the Intercept is that you can have a substantive exchange and get actual progressive ideas out instead of just defending the status quo to Brian Williams, right?
Also, one other point though on this claim that I'm about access, I don't even write about these cats that much. The last time I interviewed AOC, I'm pretty sure, was with you in, what was that?
Beginning of 2020, February 2020.
Yeah.
No, 2019.
19. Yeah, we're 2 years ago. Because the Squad in general is not. It's not. They're not making news because they're not in.
Right, but it's not just about interviews, Ryan. It's about getting tidbits from their campaign. Leaked memos, and we cultivate relationships as journalists.
Right, but those politicians, they give you stuff not because they like you, but because they feel like they have to, and it's in their interests. Like that's what's going on.
Sure, but they could give it to you, or they could give it to Huffington Post, or they could give it to The Nation, or they could there are options even in the lefty media world to who can break the story. Who's going to get the scoop.
They almost never have scoops. Almost never.
But
they got nothing.
Look, I don't want to belabor this point because this isn't even a point that I have made, but I do think that if you want to undermine or cut the perception that the Intercept is doing access journalism, maybe you think you can just make the argument and people should accept it. And okay, well, you made the argument. We'll see what the people say. My advice, not that anyone's asking for my advice, and if this is like a funny position for me to be in, and you can say like,
always
go
happy
away,
to take your advice.
Young grasshopper, like this is not your place to say. But from my perception of how this has gone down online is that it seems obvious that there is a relation, and I felt it being here. It feels obvious that there's a relationship that the Intercept has with some of these people that is unique. Mm-hmm. When I started here, it was like 2 weeks before AOC's primary win, a month maybe before. And I remember feeling like I was on AOC beat, that I was coming up in politics, that AOC was coming up, and I was there when she won, and no one thought it was going to happen. I felt tethered, and like there was a relationship there. And then we did the South by Southwest interview, and
exactly.
you build. And so the idea that there isn't something there, I think, is a little bit... It's a little unbelievable.
Sure, that's fair.
And so the way to set the ship right, and the way to win back the credibility of folks, whether or not you care to, would be to have an interview that is sincerely uncomfortable and adversarial in a way that most of us in the left media space have never really had with them, because up until this point, we've all been on the same page.
Right. No, I get that. It's the claim about the access just got to me.
I know. Look,
killing me.
What I don't understand is, why is he trying to bullshit us on this? I mean, as if, like, one of the whole point behind the emergence of new media is because of the clear biases that have been existing in mainstream media. And one of the worst of them is the access journalism. And it's gotten to the point where the media, I mean, there's many reasons why the media doesn't ask hard questions to politicians, but they become the laughing stock of the world. That's how bad it's gotten. And a lot of that is because they know if they're too tough on politicians, the politicians won't come on their show. And none of these journalists have any integrity. None of them have any type of journalistic standards or ethics. They're just paid actors, news actors. So they know it's best for their career if they can have a senator or a congressperson come on the show. So they'll just do that. And they'll do whatever it takes to get them on the show. And it's not just conjecture. What did we learn in the WikiLeaks back in 2016? The DNC, the chair of the DNC, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who was supposed to be neutral, by the way, she emailed host, I think it was maybe the host of Morning Joe or the producers of Morning Joe, whatever, and said that somebody on your show was too critical of Hillary Clinton, and that she was going to go to the head of MSNBC, I believe it was Phil Griffin, and she was going to bring it up to them so that it didn't happen again. That was Debbie Wasserman Schultz's own words in email. So, and of course, everything else in that legendary document that showed all the coordination between the media and the Hillary Clinton campaign, and all the shit that they were doing just to get access, the smears that they were doing, the coordinated smears and not talking about certain candidates and propping up Hillary Clinton, all for access. And Ryan Grimm has the audacity to come out here and act like that's not even a thing. He not making the case that the Intercept isn't doing access journalism, which, boy, that's one hell of a case to make. He's not even trying to make that case. What he's saying is access journalism isn't even a thing. It's not even a thing. I don't know what you're talking about. And then he tries to act like it's not real, and his evidence for that he provides is that sometimes like during the Obama administration, you ask some hard questions of Democrats and they don't like it, but they know you have an audience, so they come anyway. I don't even agree with that, because the key example here, proof and point, Jimmy Dore. Jimmy Dore arguably at this point has the largest, or if not one of the largest, online lefty followings. So, and his show in the news and politics genre is incredibly popular, one of the most popular. If in terms of live stream views, arguably the most. So they won't go on his show. And the reason why, it's not because he's particularly bad. They'll go on mainstream media. They'll all go on mainstream media, the Justice Democrats. They'll all go on corporate media. And corporate media who's lied about every war, corporate media who will lie about our gross for-profit health insurance system that we have and lie for the corporate oligarchy. They will all go on corporate. So it's not like some moral objection. They think Jimmy Dore is so extraordinarily vile that they won't ever go on his show. That's not what it is, because they were all on his show when they needed, when nobody knew who they were, and they wanted to be introduced to a lefty audience. So it's not like they think he's particularly vile. They won't ever go on his show because, and it's not because he doesn't have a big enough audience. He has more people watching his show than people reading the Intercept articles. I can guarantee it. So don't tell me the reason they're choosing to do interviews with Ryan Graham is because the Intercept has this huge lefty audience and they just know where else to go. They're doing it because they know you're going to do shitty interviews and do softball interviews, and you're going to let them slide on all the shit that they're doing. So that answer was such bullshit. That answer was such bullshit. They won't ever go on any show, independent show or otherwise, that will hold their feet to the fire from the left. Ask them why they aren't doing the shit that they ran on from the left. Ask them why they didn't force that vote on Medicare for all, and grill their ass on it. They won't go on anybody's show to do that. That's why they haven't done it. And don't tell me it's because the audience is so small. Those same audiences, those same lefty audiences of hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people, that's what got them elected, and that's what made them prominent political figures to this day. So don't tell me they aren't going on the shows because their audience is so small. They aren't doing it because they don't want certain questions. So guess who they're going to go to? The people like Ryan Grimm, and honestly, it pains me to say it, Jeremy Scahill at the Intercept. They'll go to them. They'll do because they know that they are engaging in access journalism, and they know that there's certain lines that they won't cross, and it'll be a safe interview. So Ryan Grimm is so full of shit here, and I mean, it was just an illuminating conversation that he had with Briahna Joy Gray. I encourage everybody to watch the whole thing. And like I said, boy, there's a lot of charlatans in not only the politicians but in the media space, and I welcome the discourse on this, because one of the people act like the only reason why the left movement doesn't we haven't made advancements is entirely because the system's rigged against us, or because the power that the corporate Democrats have, the power that the Republicans have. That's why we made no advancements. That's a big chunk of the problem. But we also need to get our own house in order. And specifically with the media apparatus, the lefty media apparatus, they aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. That's just plain and simple. And I am definitely not one of those people who think that everybody should, there's one specific kind of show, one specific kind of content that everybody in this media space needs to be doing. We all have our own jobs or our own roles, but there are basic standards that we should all be fulfilling for whatever role it is. And if you're going to take claim the role of one of the most premier journalist institutions, lefty journalist institutions in the country, well, then you have to be, especially if you have access to these politicians, you need to be making our case, and you need to be grilling them and holding them accountable from the left. And if you aren't doing that, if you're failing at that, then you're encouraging them to keep doing the shitty shit that they're doing, the selling us out and becoming part of the establishment, what they've already become part of the establishment. You're encouraging all of that and enabling all of that. So when you don't hold them accountable. So, like I said, there are many people in the media who have no credibility anymore. And it was great to see Briahna have this interview with Ryan Grimm. And I mean, honestly, her takeaway from this, it appears to be different from mine. It appears that they made up and they're friends again, because they did have some beef over this whole force of vote thing. And that's her prerogative. That's her own personal friendship or whatever. I'm telling you, that interview did not change my opinion of Ryan Grimm for the better. It only made it worse, because he came off incredibly disingenuous and full of shit.